It was about the sort of ambiguities in the phrasing. Is it urgent?
I spent all of the rest of my money for the month for buying Margot a bonnet.
I'm supposed to be recording a podcast.
You're welcome. Look how stupid she looks.
It's good content. It's great
good
content.
Okay, well, goodbye. Thank you. I'm so glad I have you as an emergency contact. This look really stupid.
You did look very stupid.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome back to The Editorial, the podcast where we talk about everything we get wrong. I'm Jack Kelly and I'm joined by Zach Michaelis, TLDR's editor-in-chief, who we're going to berate for the next however many minutes.
Yeah, fun. Very much looking forward to it. It's been a while.
It's been a while. It's been about a month since the last episode.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we've made mistakes since then. So let's get into it. Which channel do you want to start with?
So just to be specific about it, the last time we did the editorial, 8th of March. So everything from the 8th of March, we're going to have a quick look over. I'm going to start with global. And again, as regular viewers will know, the way this works is I look at the like-dislike ratio or any sort of like glaring mistakes that are still worth mentioning. And anything that's below like 96.5, which is our sort of like lower end of the normal range, talk about any of the mistakes we made. So on global, the day after our last editorial, we released a video called 3 Reasons Biden Could Still Beat Trump. I think this video was a sort of companion video to another video we did on 3 reasons Trump will beat Biden.
Yeah.
And I think with all those 3 reasons videos, you always have a slightly lower like-dislike ratio because quite a lot of the audience might not have seen the first one, even though we make it very explicit. I think quite a lot of people just click like, oh, this is partisan. Also, the Trump-Biden thing, you get a lot of passion on either side. I think that's not an excuse necessarily, but I do think it generally means that there was a slightly lower like-dislike ratio in the first place. But then there was more substantial criticism, which was people were saying that like the respective titles betrayed some bias. So like 3 reasons Trump will beat Biden versus 3 reasons Biden could still beat Trump.
That's true.
That's fair,
Yeah,
but that's just a reflection of what the polling data suggests at the time.
That is true, yes.
So just to justify that, that's just because at the time, although interestingly about this has changed, the bookies had Trump as a really strong favorite when we wrote both those videos. It was sort of something like 50% Trump and then about 15, there's basically like a 10% difference in the respective odds of winning the presidency in 2024. That has actually since changed. In the last couple of days, Biden has actually gone above Trump in the bookies odds, which is a story in and of itself. I should probably write a script about that when we finish this. But yeah, so that is why those were titled differently. But anyway, that's the first one worth mentioning. Then we did the 3 reasons Trump will beat Biden. Actually, so I got that the wrong way around. That came out later. That had an identical like-dislike ratio actually to the previous one.
You're just going to have people clicking on those videos to some extent to say, no, you won't, and then dislike.
The Cuba video we did, Do Cuba's Protests Spell the End for Its Communist Government, has a like-dislike of 95.4. I don't think there was anything actually wrong with that video in terms of like substance. I think what people had a bit of an issue with is that they felt that there's a dispute in the comments basically about what is more to blame for Cuba's various woes. Is it the long-standing American embargo? Oh, that actually is a mistake. We use the word embargo and blockade interchangeably. Some commenters correctly pointed out that's not quite true. It's an embargo, not a blockade, because a blockade requires like some sort of physical naval presence.
Okay.
But there was this debate in the comments about whether or not it's it's the American embargo or whether it's Cuba's communist policies. We say it's a bit of both in the video. I think that is the correct answer. I don't really think we take actually much of a position on the relative weighting of those causes. So I don't think we have much to apologize for there. I think that at least judging by the sort of prevalence of the respective comments, it seemed like quite a lot of people were basically saying that the American embargo has nothing to do with it and you shouldn't blame the Americans for Cubans' woes. I mean, that is just, I don't think that's at all plausible. Especially, I mean, that's just not the opinion of well-versed analysts, as it were, or basically any seasoned economist. Obviously, massive embargoes from the world's most powerful economy have terrible effects on a country's economy. And you can do studies basically where like every time the sanctions escalate, you see how that affects Cuba's economy. And that's not to say that the government hasn't mismanaged things, but I don't know, it's a very bit, the American embargo is clearly a very big reason why Cuba is struggling economically. And, again, you see that reflected in the UN voting patterns, like the fact that every year the General Assembly calls on the US to end its embargo.
Yeah.
And even all the European countries, vote for it. And there wouldn't be such sort of unanimity on that point if there wasn't also a sort of accompanying consensus that this embargo is doing terrible damage to Cuba's economy and therefore to like the well-being of its people. And then we have why is Turkey's military everywhere? That got 94%. Real diehard fans can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there was anything sort of factually incorrect about that video. I think there was this sense people were basically saying this is anti-Turkey because the implication is like, what is it doing, outside of its national borders? I don't think that was actually implied, and people were saying, you never do this about America. We definitely would do it about America. It's just all the other YouTubers have done it for us, and so we're not going to get as many views if we did it about America. And I think that Turkey's expanding military footprint is a more recent story. Turkey.
I think it's also more surprising, right? Like everyone knows the America story.
Yeah,
the Turkey one is more noteworthy.
Yeah, I couldn't see any factual errors on that, but I think there was a sense in which it might have been anti-Turkey. The next one, which I think is an interesting one, is why is China understating its trade surplus? That got 96%, still very good. And I think there's actually something to be said for this. I don't think many commentators articulate this, but in the video, I describe a framework of understanding trade imbalances and trade balances that is not necessarily the overwhelming. Basically, economists still disagree about what is important when it comes to trade balances. And I don't think I acknowledge those differences in the video. So maybe if we were being like hyper neutral, which we probably should aspire to be, I would have made more, be like, some economists think this, some economists think that. I don't really think we had my justification here is I don't think we had the time to do that. And I think it would have been too complicated and just boring for most viewers. I also think that there is an emerging consensus that the way of looking at trade that I described is the one that most economists are now coming around to.
Sure.
A lot of this revolves on basically whether or not bilateral trade balances matter. So I said Trump was mistaken for focusing on bilateral trade balances. I still think that's just like completely true, that the American criticism of Chinese sort of unfair trade practices doesn't need to talk about bilateral trade balances. It should be focused on China's overall trade balance, the fact that it just exports in general more than it imports. Bilateral trade data can just be misleading because in a hyper-globalized economy, trade is sort of flitting between boundaries so quickly that, like, if you, for example, the example we give is that, China could just redirect all its trade through Mexico, and then the bilateral trade balance would go away, but the actual trade patterns are identical. The other one is like, if you just look at the US bilateral trade balance with the Netherlands or something, and the US would look at that and be like, well, why? The Netherlands has this enormous trade deficit with us, so it buys way more American stuff than it exports to America. What's going on there? That's just because of Rotterdam. It's just because America's sending all its stuff for the rest of Europe.
Yes.
And so it would be a mistake to go like, oh, we have this weirdly unique relationship with the Netherlands, but not with any of the other European countries. No, it's just because it's just the way trade flows work.
Yeah.
That, I do think that there is an emerging consensus that bilateral trade balances don't really matter.
Okay.
So, sorry, it's quite technical, but basically people thought it was a pot shot at Trump. I think it's a fair shot at Trump. And I think that it's something that the rest of the sort of, I think the economic world has always thought this, but the political world is coming around to the idea that bilateral trade balance is at least very much secondary to overall trade balance.
Got it.
Sorry, that was long for something that's quite technical, but I think it's worth addressing. Iran-Israel is the next one on the list that had 95.4. This was written by Rory and edited by me. I don't actually think there's anything wrong with this video at all. The only thing is that I don't think we made enough in the video about the sort of like legal technicalities of basically whether or not a consulate is sovereign land.
Okay.
And it's technically not. It's actually just that there are conventions that say you shouldn't strike it. That was the only sort of like half error. I think I'd say there was some dispute over some of the footage used that actually came from like Israel when we were talking about Syria, some of the like stock footage used while we were narrating. There was some dispute over whether or not we should describe it as a consulate building or a building next to the embassy or, all that sort of thing. I think we should have spent longer talking about that and explaining basically whether or not it's like illegal under national law, whether or not it's considered sovereign territory. I think either way, the gist of the video is still obviously like the overall message of the video that this is sort of will be treated as a massive escalation is obviously still true. But there are some technicalities that I think we sort of skipped over there. Somalia, there's a pinned comment in the video. It's got a very high, just like 98.4. But in it, we write that Somalia is divided by ethnicity. That's not quite true. It's divided by clans. Somalia is actually very much ethnically homogenous.
Okay.
But it's the various clans that have sort
Sure.
of disputes. I think that's everything in global.
Okay, great.
So long, but there we go.
There.
On EU, I think we have quite a lot more to talk about on EU.
More.
Yeah, I'm surprised. Normally EU is our, as it were, like least controversial
Yeah.
channel. But I think in part because we did quite a lot of Ukraine related content, and that has proven more contentious with the audience. I think that there are some more videos worth addressing.
Okay.
So the first one is that the day after, March 9th, the day after the last editorial, which was, could a NATO attack really happen? That has a lower, or what could a Russia-Nato war really happen? That has a 93% basically, which is quite low for us. I think the overwhelming reason this is because the maps were wrong, and we haven't forgot to update our NATO maps.
Yes.
Didn't have Sweden and Finland in them. They also, for some reason, had Ireland in it.
Yeah, very odd. Not sure how that got through.
That slipped through. And then I don't think there was much issue with the content of the video. I think it was more that some people thought that we were probably paying too much credence to the idea of a Russian attack on NATO. But they're basically saying this is never ever going to happen. We sort of addressed that like assumption in the video. But
Yeah.
I can see why some people would be like, oh, this is sort of fear mongering, like it's just not plausible. What's gone wrong with Sweden's economy? That has like a 96.2. I think some people basically wanted to say that this isn't really a crisis for Sweden. This is what Sweden sort of expects
Sure.
from high interest rates. You know, Swedes know that basically their mortgages are all floating, and so that when interest rates go up, this is sort of like, this is the price you pay for like what they would say is like a more functional, more sort of market responsive housing market. There was also, at the end of the video, we suggested the government isn't that popular. Some Swedish people were basically saying that no, they are quite popular, and that Kristersson is well liked by Swedish standards. The point we make in the video is still fair, that by international standards he is not very popular, still has quite a negative approval rating, and his party is not polling brilliantly either. So I think that's sort of everything to say in that one. There was some confusion over a graph. I just don't think we've matched the narration. It was about the sort of like tertiary industry jobs. Sweden losing out on what's sometimes called like brain business jobs. I think that's a turn of phrase in like certain bits of European bureaucracy. And I think that was just, it's not a common turn of phrase in English. We probably shouldn't have used it. So that elicited some confusion. Italy's economy doing surprisingly well. 96.3. People were just saying that actually, I'm an Italian. I don't feel this.
Which is fair. Those
Sort
are
of-
two different things, kind
Sort
of.
of fair.
Yeah. The US feels similarly.
Hungary running out of friends and money. People saying that it's too sort of anti-Hungary. I think that's fair in terms of title thumb. It's difficult. We were sort of torn on this in the office. Did we feel this was too much or not quite enough? I think the content of the video itself is fair. I don't think the content of it is actually that partisan. I appreciate that. I think the title was a bit heavy-handed. It just feels a bit much, as it were.
Sure.
The actual results in Russia's election, that video has 95.9. I think quite a lot of people were basically saying that, oh no, in the video, we say the actual results were probably about 20-25% less. We get to that number by inferring, but by basically calculating the mismatch between official and actual results using a badly falsified bit of regional data from the Dalanovsky district in Moscow. People were saying no, the results were way lower. Putin didn't actually win 60%. Putin almost definitely did still win a majority, unfortunately. That's just, you know, even like liberal polls suggest that. But that, I think some people were basically pushing back against the idea that Putin, nonetheless, even though he massively inflated his numbers, nonetheless won a majority. Then we have, have Serbia and the EU fallen out for good? That has 94.4. I can't find anything wrong with this video at all. I just think that there's, maybe the thumb says, is Serbia about to ditch Europe? I think there's some people saying, well, Serbia can't ditch Europe, you know. We're ditching you, not the other way around, as it were, or like you weren't in the EU in the first place. I think it's just a controversial topic. There was, you know, the Serbia is obviously, Serbian foreign policy is obviously controversial in Europe and around Serbia. And I think that just the topic elicits some contrarianism, as it were. So then I think that is basically everything.
Okay.
So that's everything on EU.
Do you think there's a reason for that uptick? You say obviously Russia, Ukraine a little bit.
I think I just, so I think I probably overstayed the difference between global and EU. I have noticed that in general, Russia adjacent content does seem to have a slightly lower dislike ratio. I think that is because there are probably a section of the YouTube audience who are Well, very pro-Ukraine and very, very pro-Russia. And I think that any sort of like topic that elicits that degree of passion, they just tend to have slightly lower like dislike ratios. You know, like you're going to get more disagreement in the comments on a Russia video than you are on like, you know, what happened to France's left wing.
Have we noticed any shift there too, with obviously internationally kind of sympathy for Ukraine is waning perhaps? People are less interested in the war. There's like more apathy there. Do you think we've seen that at all? That like there's more, if not pro-Russia, at least less pro-Ukrainian likes coming in?
Absolutely. And then I also think on the other side of the aisle, the fervently pro-Ukraine types can get a bit upset when a video is like relatively balanced. I did a video not long ago basically saying that Russia is sort of, in some senses, winning the attritional war, which I just think is true. I think you can really see that in the way territory is moving at the moment. We've got a lot of pushback on that from people saying, yeah, no, it's not. Ukraine is going to blow up Moscow or whatever it is.
Sure.
And so I think you just get it from both sides. You know? You get it from people saying that Russia's going to end the West, and then you get it from people saying Ukraine is going to take over all of Russia. And you're sort of stuck in the middle. That's not to say that we shouldn't, so just on those things, obviously there are controversial topics. The same is true of like a Biden-Trump video, and those videos just naturally have lower like-dislike ratios. To some extent, you just have to accept that as a YouTuber, as a YouTuber. You have to accept that. But then, you know, I'm sympathetic to the idea that that's not a full excuse. Like, in an absolutely ideal case, we should be able to sufficiently articulate both sides of the argument to the point where both sides agree with our description of their takes. And then hopefully get a 100% like dislike ratio again in an ideal case. So I just want to make clear that I'm not suggesting that the fact that a topic evokes passion on both sides of the aisle means that we're just going to be lazy about it and be like, okay, there's lower like dislike ratio. We should still be aspiring to a very high like dislike ratio, and the way of achieving that is to properly articulate both sides of the argument.
Sure.
But that is obviously just harder, and there is a sense in which they just will be slightly lower in general, at least.
Got it.
So the only video worth mentioning on UK, I think, is Scotland's new Hate Crime Act Explained. I actually think Ben wrote this video. I think he did a great job. I think it's the sort of very well researched and quite balanced, to be fair to him. It's obviously about a very controversial topic. It's sort of implicitly about trans rights. And as we just talked about, controversial topics obviously just breed lower like-dislike ratios. But it's still quite well received. 95.4 is still far higher than most YouTubers. And, you know, I think we got a bit from both sides. I think basically some people were saying we weren't being sufficiently critical of this act. And then we also got flack from people on the left of the political aisle basically saying that this is a good law and that we're being too critical of it, and it's sort of necessary to protect trans rights. I think Ben did a pretty good job and was fundamentally a very controversial topic. So I'm not going to apologise for that. The last teensy one, there's only a technicality because it's 96.3 like dislike ratio. It's about how the UK and China went from friends to foes. There was some pushback about the end of this video, which was written by me, where I basically say that there's a possibility that the UK-China relationship recovers in the near future, because the argument I make there is that if the UK moves away from America towards Europe, you know, basically if Starmer wins and Trump wins, then I think the Brits will follow the European line on China, and I think that is softening at the moment. Maybe I made too much of that. Maybe it's too much to say that the European line is softening on China, as it were. Maybe it's just not getting harsh as quickly as America is. I think that's probably fair. I probably should have made more of that in the video. Probably should have spoke a bit more about how the European relationship to China is developing, and it is sort of my personal opinion that the Europeans will end up taking quite a soft line on China. That's sort of just a take that I have, sort of have accidentally imposed on the channel as a whole. So I apologise for that. I acknowledge.
Boo. Stop giving us your opinions. No one cares.
That's everything, I think.
Cool.
God,
bit of a long one, but good to run through. I think some of those are like just errors. Those hopefully are being corrected for. The animation thing, especially, we've got we're updating maps and stuff a bit. There's some more standardized maps. There was a video, I think it wasn't picked up on that list, but and I'm not sure if anyone noticed it, so maybe I shouldn't say anything, but the one that we released about Turkey and Hungary being like the bromance video, that one was a map that didn't designate Kosovo at all and was just total Serbia.
Just Serbia.
Which is just an old map that I reused. I animated that one, so throwing myself under the bus.
Stop letting Vucic go on maps.
I don't know. The maps thing is being corrected for to some extent, so that is one actual mistake. besides that, I think kind of the videos themselves were getting better at checking and making sure errors are knocked out. So,
Yeah, I think so. I have a little errors doc of all the sort of like little errors we make. We normally catch them now pre-animation, finally. And they definitely have declined markedly in the last couple of weeks. I also hope that in the UK we had 2 bank holidays, which made the last couple of weeks a bit rushed. But this week and going forwards, just having new writers who are now well enough versed so they can most write their own stuff, and my editing burden isn't too heavy, just means that we should have enough slack in the system to catch more and more errors going forwards.
Amazing.
Would be good.
We're doing
it?
ourselves out of a podcast.
God, that would be making the editorial redundant. It's like therapy. We're trying to make ourselves redundant.
There should be an episode where like we sit down and we're like, oh no, there is nothing.
Yeah, it is like journalistic therapy, isn't it?
Yeah.
In a way.
I mean, unfortunately, this episode is the absolute opposite. This has been a relatively long one, so heading in the wrong direction right now, but we'll get there.
Yeah, nice.
2 weeks' time, we'll get there.
If there's anything else we've missed, please do leave a furious comment down in
as angry as you can.
comments. Yeah, please. I don't know how to communicate it via the screen, but just get angry. And then I guess we will ideally see you
2 weeks' time.
in 2 weeks. Let's aspire
I'll be
to
here.
that. I'll be here.
Lovely.
Am I? Yeah, I'll be here.
We'll be here.
We'll be here. 2 weeks. Nice.
Goodbye.